It's Tata's Tuesday, and yes, difficult topic again, but I want to bring this article, this piece of excellent investigative journalism. Yes, it still happens. Yay, to your attention because it's a great follow-up to the Megan Ebo's dialogue options from last week. In that interview, which I suggest you go back and watch before diving into this, Megan offered her opinions about what is causing what many people refer to as a rape kit testing backlog, which is in fact not a backlog. It's an epidemic of officers not sending collected rape kits in to be tested. And she talked about some of the reasons that may be and also what to do about it. And what I found compelling about this article is on many points, it is exactly what Megan was saying in Canada nationally. And Megan's an American, which is exciting because it means that Megan's prescriptions for what to do about it will actually work. So it's a good use of people's energy. And that's great. And I'm not saying this data is perfect. I'm saying it's compelling. Saying something is compelling is not saying it's 100% right. It is another sort of brick on the road that is consistent with previous bricks, which is how science works. When you can replicate something, that gives it more credibility. I am not saying that only women get sexually assaulted. This is a problem this particular problem predominantly affects women because women are the bulk of people who come forward. The reasons why many men do not come forward when they are victims of sexual assault are myriad. They are valid, and that is an intersecting issue. But right now, this is an issue that predominantly affects women. And unfortunately, because of the dorksiders, this causes many people to tune out because fuck feminism. And so here's data, and it's very compelling. And that is the purpose of presenting this. It is not to force you to think a certain way. It is not to insist that women should always be believed ever, that there should be no evidence required. No, due process still matters, and the innocent until proven guilty standard of our court systems is very important. What this article is about is a 20-month-long investigation, 870 police forces. And what it found is that 1 in 5 sexual assault claims nationally, it was actually 19%, so a little below 1 in 5, nationally across Canada, were dismissed as unfounded. Not lacking evidence, not the victim didn't want to go forward. Those are separate codes to close the file. Unfounded. Beyond actually not believed. The victim was actively disbelieved. And this is more than double the number we would expect to see. Because 2 to 8% of sexual assault allegations are false. Best we know. So a 19% national average of unfounded is clearly too high. It's outside the margin of error of 3 to 4%. One would also think that the national average of, unfounded cases would be lower than 8%. Because police would be giving victims benefit of the doubt. That doesn't mean they have to lay a charge. It just means they are sympathetic to the fact that coming forward with any sort of criminal complaint is a very traumatic process. This picture up here is pretty much what it feels like. You could substitute a man for a woman in that picture and it would be just as intimidating. Police stations are not nice places. So what this article, which is written by Robyn Doolittle, which for background, if you recognize the name, Robyn Doolittle was one of the 2 reporters at the Toronto Star that originally saw the Rob Ford crack tape. Rob Ford called her a liar. It turned out she was not a liar, and now she works at the Globe and Mail. So Robyn Doolittle has a track record of being accurate on difficult things, on controversial things. I suggest you read this particular really difficult to read case study of a woman they're calling Ava. I'm sure that's not her name, but this is a case where there were witnesses, multiple witnesses. Some of them took photos. 2 women found her sobbing after the assault, which occurred outside. And the attacker dropped his wallet at the scene. A rape kit was taken. And the police marked this as unfounded. Unfounded. Didn't necessarily, I guess they didn't feel like they needed to test the rape kit because they knew who the guy was. But they determined, basically the cops determined for the court system that she was just drunk. We don't believe you that you didn't consent. And this is not an isolated incident based on the national data. You'll see that some major cities are within that 2 to 8% that we would expect. Winnipeg, Toronto, St. John's. It's a little disheartening that that's it in terms of major Canadian centers. Now, let's give Edmonton a pass. It's in that margin of error territory of 3 to 4%. Calgary's edging Calgary, Vancouver, but they're still outside the margin of error. Cities like Montreal, Halifax. Well, Halifax isn't the same as Vancouver and Calgary, but Montreal is decidedly outside the margin of error. Ottawa's way outside it. Now, there's an asterisk on Ottawa that I'll get to in a minute. But Whitehorse, Yellowknife, Iqaluit, St. John, and yes, St. John is a different city than St. John's. These numbers are way too high. By any, more than half of women in St. John, New Brunswick are just, no, you're wrong or you're lying. There's something really wrong there. And there are reasons. There are reasons for this, and they line up very much with what Megan was saying. And they have found that even Toronto to the suburbs surrounding Toronto, because you see that, Toronto itself, which is a gray, which means under 10%, is surrounded by all these little red bubbles. And that gets into that thing Megan was saying, that suburban areas, good neighborhoods, want to keep their crime statistics down. There is institutional pressure on police departments to downplay the amount of crime that's happening in these areas. I checked my own area, which is a suburb of Toronto. It's a big area, so I'm not doxing myself. 31%. And there were 2,058 allegations. 648 of those allegations were considered unfounded. So chop off that 8% or even 10%, will be generous, probably are unfounded. You've still got hundreds of people going to the police and not being treated appropriately. And you'll see here, when an allegation made to police is unfounded, it means that the investigator does not believe a criminal offense occurred. Once a case is dismissed as unfounded, it is no longer considered a valid allegation. Now, what does this mean? It means it is not reported to Statistics Canada. And that keeps the reported crime rates of an area down. So, point for Megan there. The next point for Megan I want to get into, and I know this is jumping around a bit, but her assertion that what will work is keeping on the police departments, that sort of name and shame tactic. The case study of the city of Ottawa backs her up. But you'll see here, this was the asterisk I talked about involving Ottawa. In 2010 to 2012, it was a huge number. 34%, 35%, and 38% unfounded. There was a large campaign to hold the police service accountable after 2 years of criticism. Just 2 years. The number fell from 38%, which is double the national rate, to 12%, which is right around that area we want to see. It should be a little bit lower, but that's a much better number than 38%. One interesting trend in the data reviewed by the Globe: those police services that have had to deal with negative media coverage or increased scrutiny of the issue in the past have lower rates. And that's what happened in Ottawa. So what Megan's telling us will work has worked. That doesn't mean it's going to work in every police area. But I think the city of Toronto is another good example of that. The city of Toronto proper, because it is a media hub, gets much more attention than the surrounding suburbs, because people who live in Toronto don't like to go to the suburbs. They turn their noses up at it. And so there is a lot of notably liberal media criticism of the Toronto Police Department specifically. Peel Regional Police, York Region Police, Durham Region, they don't get the same scrutiny. And so we go from a 7% statistic of unfounded in the city of Toronto to 25% in the entire province. Still, there's only one province within that very generous margin of error of 8% plus 3 or 4%, and that's British Columbia. And apparently the reason that British Columbia is in that area, acceptable zone for the purposes of this, is because in the province of British Columbia, the police don't choose to lay the charge primarily. The Crown Attorney does. And so in order to get someone charged, the police have to make their case to the Crown. It's more like what you see on TV than what actually happens, which is police lay a charge and then the Crown Attorney has to defend it. And so in British Columbia, it is not up to the cops to decide whether someone is telling the truth or not. Now this gets us into the next thing. Shouldn't police be trained to spot liars? And the truth is, some are. There are professional interrogators who are trained to know when to spot liars. The fact that there are people who are trained in this skill means most cops aren't. Things get missed. Here we go. One of the things that this Globe and Mail report decided is the police need more science, less gut. And all the nerds, myself included, who watch this channel go, yay, more reels, less feels. And one of the things that we need to understand about these things is that the actual way police have been trained to determine whether a complainant is telling the truth doesn't work with a traumatized person. This is admittedly a problem. Officers have traditionally been taught to establish credibility by getting as much detail as possible, as soon as possible, and then checking back with anyone interviewed to see if those details change in subsequent interviews. Standard technique has also been to go through the story chronologically. Sometimes complainants would even be asked to tell the story backwards. The problem is that's causing well-intentioned police officers to not believe real victims. And that's because of what happens to the brain when it is in trauma, especially when it is violent trauma. The brain in times of trauma and intense fear is flooded with pain-blocking hormones. And what that derails, what that takes offline, is the ability to log and catalog long-term memories. Police are expecting victims to give a linear account of an attack with a chronology in a point in time when they can't. People remember trauma, and I can tell you this firsthand, in glimpses called sensory fragments. Meaning you can remember a smell, you can remember an image, but remembering what came first is really hard. What happens is the police think this person can't talk about this coherently. This story doesn't make sense. It's all over the place. I can't understand this. This is not believable. It says here it can take up for 72 hours for stress hormones to leave the brain. But police tend to interview people immediately. And so they're interviewing someone when they don't have access to their full memories. And this is going to be a very difficult thing to change institutionally with police, because this is decades and decades and decades of best practices they're asking to change. Urban police forces do better than rural police forces. West Coast police forces, including RCMP detachments, had below average rates as opposed to East Coast. The other thing they found, other than urban centers, is there's a correlation, and I maintain it's a weaker correlation than I would claim, and I'll show you why based on the chart. But there is a correlation between having an above average percentage of female officers and lower than average unfounded numbers. The national unfounded rate was 19%. The unfounded rates among communities with a higher than average percentage of female officers was 15%. Now, obviously, that incorporates into the national average. However, that's within, remember I said that 3 to 4% margin of error? That's why I say this is a weak correlation. I'm not sure about this. Obviously, there's an effect, but it might be a minor one. And you'll see here from this graph, yes, the bulk of dotty dots are in this quadrant. Fewer female police officers and higher unfounded rate. Now, it would be great if we could see visually how many of these female officers were actually on the West Coast. Because if geographic and urban factors factor into this, so if you find more female police officers in urban centers on the West Coast, then there are other geographic factors that make it harder to isolate what the impact of female officers are. Down geographically, region to region, I mean, here's Ontario, and you'll see, boom, fewer female officers and high unfounded rate, right? British Columbia, well, they've got a low rate no matter what. So what do these statistics matter? But here's the population size statistic, and this is why I'm saying more women in urban communities makes sense, and this may skew the data. You'll see that the unfounded rate starts to rise until you hit 50,000 people, and then it starts to fall again. And by the time you hit large cities, large urban centers, the number is still too high. It's double what it should be, but it's way less scary than this number. And what it really comes down to me, is that a better trained, better educated police force is more likely to appropriately believe or disbelieve a complainant. That police forces like those in Toronto, Winnipeg, and Surrey, that's in British Columbia, that have shed outdated methods and attitudes have reduced their unfounded rates to single digits. It's not equipment. It's not money. And yes, it takes money to train people, but police should constantly be being retrained anyway because of public awareness. And public awareness means police departments are able to overcome the institutional inertia of this attitude of my dad was a cop and my granddad was a cop And my great uncle was a trained cop, and he's passed on now, but he used to regale us of stories of, I laid him out like a rug. We took him downstairs and, talking about beating people in the breadbasket with phone books. That is how far policing has come. And it's that traditional pride, because it's tough to be a cop. It's really hard, especially now, because I feel like the nature of the criticisms is not as well made as it is in this report that actually uses data. Most of it is, well, a large portion of it is stuff like, Black Lives Matter stopping the Pride Parade to say police should not be welcome as police. And that is unproductive because we need the police. There's no point in demonizing the police. Criticizing a force and demonizing a force are not the same thing. Criticism done correctly is actually a supportive act. And this is what a lot of activism needs to realize. That, yes, I'm criticizing you because I want you to be better and I think you can be better. And where a lot of these activist groups go wrong is that they start making it sound like these are inherently evil organizations with no hope of evolutionary change. It can't be done incrementally. They want a scorched earth, and we can't do that. We can't just fire a bunch of cops because that will create a vacuum. What we need to do is start seeing what's happening in Ottawa. The trend line's going in the right direction, and it is heartbreaking that people will continue to experience miscarriages of justice because change takes time. But at least we can take heart in the fact that things are going in the right direction. As somebody who did have a terribly bad experience with the police regarding a criminal harassment complaint I made, and as someone who, as a result of that experience, is now far less likely to go to the police in future. And it's because not only did the police not believe me, the police made it worse in my case. And I live in an area very similar to an area that Megan lived in. And so I think it has a lot of the same problems. And so I think it's a lot of the same solutions. And in my case, it was a female cop, which may be why I'm skeptical about this female police thing. And you see, it blows people's minds. And it's like, why? That is a police officer. And a female police officer receives the same training as a male police officer. And if the training is the problem, the gender of the cop is irrelevant. But Ava's case, I won't say it had a happy ending, because I don't think there's any way to have a happy ending here. But it had a more satisfying ending. The London Police Department, police service, who originally said her complaint was unfounded, have now remarked it founded, which means it counts in the national statistics. The entire London Police Service handling of sexual assault allegations going back to 2010 is now being reviewed. And there's mandatory specialized training called for. At the Tory leadership debate, which means the conservative leadership debate, the wing of politics that is normally unabashedly pro-police, is getting involved in this. Not to blame, but to improve. And I think that's the right approach. I think that all officers should be trained in the impact of trauma. Because if you've been subject to a violent crime, it doesn't matter that it wasn't sexual assault. You're traumatized. Which means that impact on the brain is going to be the same. And so this is a very good outcome. And this is the benefit of good investigative journalism. It can create change. And we are not dealing with a forensic evidence backlog. We are dealing with outdated training. on multiple issues. What the police are doing just doesn't work. And that's going to be hard for police to handle. And I am sympathetic to that, because this means they actually have to face the idea that they falsely accused people and they didn't believe people who shouldn't be believed. And it was because they were given outdated training. And the police are going to have to deal with their own trauma of officers who have to deal with guilt that is being accrued through no fault of their own. And so if you actually think about it, rank and file police officers are victims in a way too of this, because they've been stuck with bad training. And so police are being made the enemy, when in fact most of them are just trying to do their jobs and they don't know a better way to do it yet. And so barring the police from Pride Parade is not the way to do it. And calling the police pigs is not the way to do it. And saying that, the police should have this happen to them or that happen to them, or calling for people's jobs, or saying that there should be scorched earth. This is not the way to solve this problem. Empowering police departments to train without shame is the way to solve this problem, because we can't change the mistakes of the past. We can only prevent mistakes in the future. And I think it's important to remember that going forward, that while a good public shaming starts the process, there has to be a reconciliation and a rebuilding and a restoration as well. We need to be joyous in rewarding police departments like Winnipeg, like Toronto, like Surrey, that made the changes before this national crisis became a thing. They got caught in their own crises, but we need to reward those police departments as much as criticize the cops. Because when all somebody hears is negativity, they come at problems from a negative place. Change is possible, and we can do that together. And I say this as somebody who had a very bad experience with the police. So I will commit that when I start seeing, York Region's police numbers improve, my opinion of that particular police department will improve accordingly. And I do not fault individual officers, except the particular one I dealt with. I do fault her. Regular police officers, those of you who are listening, I don't blame you for the actions of another police officer. And individual officers, I will continue to give benefit of the doubt until they show me otherwise. I do not blame police officers for the system they have to function in. And that, I think, is the compromise, the balance that we have to strike. So I know this was a bit long, but I hope you enjoyed it. And like I said, go back and watch the Megan Ebos interview. It was very informative. And now there's evidence to back it up.